The rain had just stopped when Adrian Blake parked his modest sedan outside the glass tower where one of the country's wealthiest investment families was waiting. At 32 years old, Adrian was the founder and CEO of a fast-growing technology company that had quietly earned the respect of customers across the industry. Newspapers often described him as a brilliant entrepreneur, but those who knew him personally would say his greatest achievement was raising his 6-year-old son, Caleb. Since losing his wife 3 years earlier, Adrian had learned to balance board meetings with school pickups, investor calls with bedtime stories, and business decisions with the responsibilities of being both a father and a mother. It wasn't easy, but he never complained. Caleb was the reason he kept moving forward. That morning, his school had unexpectedly closed because of a plumbing problem. Adrian had tried to arrange a babysitter, but everyone he trusted was unavailable. Rather than cancel one of the biggest meetings of his career, he brought Caleb with him after making sure the investors had no objection. Their assistant replied that it wouldn't be a problem. As they entered the elegant lobby, Caleb looked around with wide eyes, amazed by the marble floors and sparkling chandeliers. He tightened his grip on his father's hand. "Don't worry," Adrian said with a warm smile. "Just stay close to me." "I will, Dad," he answered softly. An assistant led them into a spacious conference room where members of the Vandermeer family were already seated around a long polished table. Expensive watches, tailored suits, and confident smiles filled the room. For a brief moment, the conversation stopped as everyone looked at Adrian and then at the little boy beside him. One man glanced at Adrian's simple jacket and quietly smirked. Another exchanged amused looks with a relative. A woman leaned back in her chair and whispered something that made the others chuckle. Adrian noticed the reactions, but remained composed. He gently pulled out a chair for Caleb near the corner of the room, handed him a coloring book from his backpack, and took his seat. He had come to discuss a business partnership worth hundreds of millions of dollars. What he didn't know was that before the meeting even began, the room had already judged him by appearances instead of character. The meeting began with introductions and a presentation of Adrian's company's recent growth. He spoke with quiet confidence, explaining how his team had developed affordable software that helped small businesses manage their finances more efficiently. His numbers were solid, and every answer he gave was clear and supported by facts. For a while, the room remained professional. Then one of the Vandermeer brothers glanced toward Caleb, who was quietly coloring in the corner. "I didn't expect the CEO to bring his son to a $900 million meeting," he said with a faint smile. A few people around the table laughed politely. Another executive added, "Running a company is demanding enough. I can't imagine doing it alone with a child." The comment sounded harmless, but the tone behind it carried doubt rather than curiosity. Adrian stayed calm. "Sometimes life doesn't give us perfect circumstances," he replied. "You simply learn to do your best with what you have." Instead of moving on, an older family member leaned back in his chair. "So you're a single father?" he asked. "Business requires complete focus. Family responsibilities usually slow people down." The room grew quiet. Caleb looked up from his coloring book, sensing that something had changed. Adrian noticed his expression and gave him a reassuring smile before turning back to the table. "My son has never held me back," he said evenly. "If anything, he's the reason I work harder and make better decisions." Some of the investors exchanged thoughtful glances, but a few members of the Vandermeer family remained unconvinced. One of them shrugged and muttered that successful companies needed leaders without distractions. Adrian didn't argue. He had spent years proving himself through actions instead of words. He simply continued presenting his plans for the future, refusing to let personal remarks distract him. Although the discussion returned to business, the atmosphere had changed. Adrian realized that some people in the room were measuring success by status and assumptions rather than by integrity, resilience, and results. By the end of the afternoon, every major point of the partnership had been discussed. The legal teams had reviewed the documents. The financial projections had been approved, and both sides knew the agreement could change the future of Adrian's company. It was the kind of opportunity many entrepreneurs spent their entire lives chasing. A thick contract was placed in front of him. "If you sign today," one of the Vandermeer executives said, "the funds will be released immediately. We can announce the partnership before the market opens tomorrow." Adrian lowered his eyes to the papers but didn't reach for the pen. Before he could respond, another family member smiled and said, "There's just one thing. Next time, leave the little boy at home. Investors expect a CEO to look professional, not like a father on babysitting duty." A few people around the table laughed again. The words hung in the air. Caleb quietly looked at his father, confused by the laughter. He hadn't interrupted the meeting once. He had simply sat in his chair, drawing pictures and waiting patiently. Adrian closed the contract without reading reading another page. The room fell silent. "I'm grateful for the offer," he said calmly. "Your investment could help my company grow faster than I ever imagined." Several executives nodded, expecting him to sign. But growth means very little if it comes at the cost of self-respect. The smiles around the table slowly disappeared. "I built this company by treating people with dignity," Adrian continued. "That includes my employees, my customers, and my family. If my son is seen as an embarrassment instead of someone worthy of kindness, then we're not the right partners." One executive frowned. "Are you really walking away from a $900 million deal?" Adrian stood, picked up Caleb's backpack, and held out his hand to him. "I'm walking towards something more valuable," he replied. "A business built on respect lasts longer than one built only on money." Without another word, he and Caleb left the conference room together, leaving behind the unsigned contract and a room full of stunned faces. For a few days after the meeting, people in the business world questioned Adrian's decision. Some called it a costly mistake, while others wondered why any CEO would reject an investment of that size. Adrian ignored the headlines and returned to his normal routine. Every morning, he drove Caleb to school, spent the day working with his team, and came home in time to help with homework and read him a bedtime story. His employees noticed something important. Although the company had walked away from an enormous opportunity, Adrian's confidence never changed. He reminded them that a business built on trust could survive setbacks, but one built on compromised values would eventually lose its direction. A few weeks later, news of what had happened inside the meeting quietly spread through industry circles. Several respected investors reached out to Adrian, not because they felt sorry for him, but because they admired the way he had handled himself. They believed a leader who refused to trade his principles for money was someone worth supporting. After careful discussions, Adrian accepted a partnership with a group of investors who shared his vision. The investment was smaller than the original offer, but it came with mutual respect, complete transparency, and the freedom to grow the company without sacrificing its culture. Over the next few years, the business expanded into new countries, hired hundreds of employees, and became one of the most trusted companies in its field. Looking back, Adrian realized that walking away had not closed a door. It had opened the right one. One evening while watching the sunset from their backyard, Caleb asked, "Dad, do you ever wish you had taken that first deal?" Adrian smiled and gently shook his head. "No, sweetheart. Money can build buildings, but character builds a life. If you stay true to your values, the right opportunities will always find you." Caleb smiled, knowing that the greatest lesson his father had ever taught him was not through speeches or success, but through the choices he made when no amount of money could buy his integrity. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe to Enlightened Story, and leave a comment below sharing what part touched you the most.